Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Propensity to Talk Density, a podcast from the experts at Bell Geospace. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining me today. Now, as the global population continues to rise, so too does the demand on Earth's resources. So joining me for this roundtable discussion today to cover the ways that companies can more effectively explore for resources, we have a panel of three experts. First, we have Jim White, Executive Director for Society of Exploration Geophysicists. Jim, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Tyler. Appreciate being here.
We're also joined today by Shawn Walker. He's the Senior Geophysicist of Campbell and Walker Geophysics Limited. Shawn, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Tyler. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least is Ellie Shaw. She is the Senior Mine Geologist at Anglo American. Ellie, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks very much.
Excellent. Well, Ellie, let's kick things off with you. And just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit more about your Woodsmith Mine Project, what that is and what the goals of it are and what it can teach us as far as geophysics is concerned?
So I work for the Woodsmith Project. We're just building the mine at the moment. And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be mining a mineral, an evaporite mineral called polyhalite. And what that is, it's a fertilizer. So it's got potassium, magnesium, calcium, and sulfur in it. And if anyone who's sort of growing plants in their spare time might know, they are 4 of the 6 macronutrients that you require for plants to grow. So as far as fertilizers go, that makes polyhalite a really good product. So what we do is we mine that and then we crush it down into a fine powder, and then we regranulate it into what we call poly4, which is our final product. So as we know, I suppose, like you said, the world population is increasing rapidly. So if we're looking at a 33% rise in the world's population by 2050, then, fertilizer with the decrease in sort of arable land available is one of the best things we can do to help get the most out of the area that we have available.
Tell us about the mine, because it's my understanding that there's a challenge in terms of designing a revolutionary kind of low environmental impact mine. Is that right? Tell me a little bit more about the details as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are situated within the North York Moors National Park, which is a national park within the UK. It's really beautiful. It's like sort of lots of moorland, and yeah, so we're building a mine there, which obviously comes with a whole host of ingenious engineering solutions to make us as low impact as possible. So what we've done is we've taken the head frames that would normally stand above the shafts, and we've actually sunk those below the surface. So when you would drive past the mine, when it's in production, all you'd see is sort of a couple of 2-story farm-looking buildings, I suppose, because everything's going to be below ground. So we don't bring the ore up to surface. We're building a 37-kilometer tunnel, which is going from the mine head, which is quite inland, and going out to the port at Teesside to be by conveyor belt to be shipped away for export. So yeah, big mine, minimal impact.
That's really incredible. And so if I kind of string together all the different things that we've talked about so far, it's a big mine, like you said, with a big impact and a huge project, obviously. Yes, big mine, minimal impact. You're right. Thank you. But so I suppose as you look at like rising food demands over the next several decades and things like that, this is particularly important to have a mine that doesn't have a massive impact environmentally, that also helps meet the demand that is going to exist and continues to exist for food production around the world. Am I understanding things correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's spot on.
Absolutely. So as population continues to climb and is projected to climb, how does that impact demand and place a premium on these specific elements, like what we're talking about, like what you're mining?
Well, I suppose the best thing from our side is that our fertilizer is natural. So, it's a product from the ground. We bring it up, we crush it, we basically that is the product. It's poly-4. Whereas a lot of other fertilizers, they're developed, they're made in factories. So, even the production of fertilizer is something that is using valuable resources. You need a lot of water and things to be manufacturing.
Absolutely. So, Jim, let me turn to you now. So, how do you even begin to look for the resources needed, to look for these elements and that sort of thing? Kind of give us the details on how you begin that search.
So obviously, subsurface imaging technology, there's many forms of different geophysical imaging technologies out there, but you would start with one that obviously I think from a environmental perspective, using airborne geophysics is a good start from that perspective because of the relatively ease of operation and also the minimal impact to the environment. As Ellie pointed out, I think it's very important that we continue to try to minimize that impact, certainly for the general public, and certainly for the opportunity to continue to mine in areas that are environmentally sensitive, if you will. And so the geophysical aspect of it becomes very important. And airborne geophysics has played a role in oil and gas exploration, in mining, in mineral extraction. It's been a boom for the application of subsurface imaging for many years, and it will continue to do so. We at the SEG are a big proponents of the applied geophysics specific to industry needs and industry wants and certainly industry demands, and we continue to provide a platform, if you will, for the geoscientists to enhance their overall efforts and their overall application to the mining industry and to other industries as well.
Yeah, Jim, one of the things that you're passionate about is bringing together multiple disciplines of the geoscience sector to help solve issues, right? And to help maybe collaborate across different industries, like you mentioned. Why is that so important, and what sorts of things can people learn from working together across different disciplines?
Well, maybe I'll kind of digress real quick to talk through some of the current challenges that we have. It's a bittersweet situation for the geophysical business as a whole right now, and specific to the SEG. We've always lived in a cyclical environment with our industries. Goes up and down constantly. But this last downturn has been quite expansive. Add to that the impact, the dynamic impact from the COVID implications that we've seen, and things got further exacerbated. And then as well, there's a strong movement to the greener energy, specifically those non-core oil and gas related energy areas, as well as a movement to a net zero carbon footprint. All three of these things kind of have really forced our society and our members into a pivoting role, energy transition, if you will. And we continue to try to provide them with a platform that allows to respond to that. And I think our members and our stakeholders have done well to respond to this. Specifically in pivoting, we understand the need to address some of the other non-core energy related fields, such as geothermal, wind, carbon solutions is a big area of focus as well. As well, we have some near surface geophysical applications that we need our attention as well, like groundwater. All these things have provided us a challenge, if you will, within our society. And so one of the things that we've been doing is we've been collaborating with other societies and other organizations. Specifically, we've been looking at some of the other geoscience areas of focus. And I'm happy to announce that we just recently entered into an agreement with the American Association of Petroleum Geologists to host our annual meetings jointly for the next 5 years going forward. This year's annual meeting is going to be hosted in Denver in late September, and it's called IMAGE, which is basically the International meaning for the applied geoscience and energy. We created this in collaboration with the APG to respond better to some of the challenges that we currently have within our sector. And so we know that we can't do this alone. We know that it's not just a geophysical problem. Heck, it's not even just a geological problem, but more importantly, it's a scientific problem. And we want to continue to reach out to those organizations that can help us define a better path and certainly help us to a better solution for our stakeholders, our members, and certainly anybody in the industry as well.
Very good stuff. Very good stuff. Thank you, Jim. So, Shawn, as you look at the different options available for collecting data from mining geophysics, how do you determine what works best for a given scenario or project? Just as you heard Jim mention, airborne data collection, things along those lines. Talk me through the different options that are available and how you determine what works best.
Yeah, I'd say typically airborne geophysics are used at the beginning of a project. I mean, it can be used throughout the life cycle, but the advantages are you can cover a lot of ground quite cheaply. So, if you think of, project area, maybe it's 10 by 10 square kilometers. To walk that ground would take you an awful long time, but to fly it with a helicopter or a fixed wing, you can collect data points every, 10, 20 meters along lines a couple hundred meters apart, and you can get a full picture of your project. So that's why airborne geophysics is really important in exploration. And in terms of the different types of geophysics that are available, it really depends a lot on what you're trying to map geology. And so by the way as geophysicist maps geology is by mapping contrasts of physical properties. And so the three main physical properties you'd be looking at would be magnetics, so it'd be more or less magnetite, so magnetic rocks, density, so more or less dense rocks, and electrical conductivity. So you could think of things like massive sulfides or metallic metal deposits. And so the difficulty is that geological formations and minerals span orders of magnitude of each of those values, and there's a lot of overlap. So one rock type could actually have many different types of values. So going back to a bit what Jim said is, the value in recording multiple types of data can help you pinpoint on that variation. So, there are certain deposits, like say an iron formation is going to be very magnetic and very dense. And that's pretty consistent because it's basically massive iron. But if you get into things like a porphyry copper deposit with, copper is very important these days for batteries and wind farms, they can be much more complex. You have different alteration regions, which could give different magnetic signatures. You could be at a different erosional level. So this deposit was formed, millions of years ago. And then as the earth erodes, it could be buried, it could be kind of half eroded off. So you'll get different signatures. So that's kind of a key point of, a lot of people they'll ask me as a consultant and say, okay, well, what works best? And it really depends. And you need to work together with geologists who know about the rocks in the area. And, the more information you can bring together to build a picture, you're gonna be more successful, particularly because as we get further into, more deeper deposits, a lot of people say all the easy deposits have been found already, which may or may not be true, but they're definitely, we're looking deeper and deeper, or just trying to find things that are not as obvious. Even going over old data sets, trying to pull out more subtle things. You really need to understand what's going on, and maybe kind of move a bit away from the idea of this survey is going to find us our mine, just because there's a big red blob, basically. But using it to put together essentially a geological interpretation, which can then lead you to pathfinding in, and then maybe it'll zone into an area and you could maybe do detailed airborne geophysics, or eventually you're going to have to drill and do ground geophysics or just prospecting on the ground as well. So yeah, and I mean, imagine that's some of what's probably going on with like Ellie's project. I mean, something that's buried in a big layer is very difficult to map, regardless. Like you can't go and walk over it and see it. So you have to use some sort of remote methods. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. And on some level, you also, I'm guessing you're wanting to get multiple data points, right? As many different data points as possible. And so I also know that some of the larger companies have started looking at using Seismic, right? So would you recommend utilizing Seismic alongside other data points like Airborne or something like that to minimize the seismic impact and things along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Unfortunately, what it really eventually comes down to is cost. You know, um, if we go back to those three physical properties, I mean, magnetics is probably the most commonly thing flown because it's really cheap. I mean, the sensors are, off the shelf. It's not to downgrade its importance because it's hugely valuable, but it is quite cheap. Electromagnetics are a little more expensive. Airborne gravity, like gravity gradiometry, again, is expensive. But compared to seismic, those are still really cheap. And, like Jim mentioned, and Ellie as well, like having seismic trucks rolling through a national park is just never going to happen. And even just on, not even national park land, but just, I know working up in the Arctic in Canada and most places, they just want you to not be just bulldozing through forests and knocking down trees. So yeah, airborne geophysics helps because then you can, if you have a particular reason to go in and do, more invasive work, but in a small area with not just because we're just going to see, like, it might be a little more likely to be permitted, I'd say, even though it still might never be.
Right. So, Jim and Ellie, I want to open it up to the two of you as well to respond to what you've heard from Shawn, just talking about the different options available for collecting data for mining geophysics. What does that mean to you? And just tell us a little bit more about your experiences in these areas as well.
So I suppose on my side, surprisingly, there is actually already a fair amount of seismic data through the national park around us. But I suppose one of the nice things, so we've just flown a gravity survey with Bell fairly recently, and the gravity actually is really complementary with the seismic information that we already have. So those two work really well together to give you sort of a best picture. And I suppose one thing that people tend to forget when you're in a mining environment is that your deposit is there for a reason. It was laid down for millions and millions of years ago because of specific geological events happening. You've got to see at the right time and things, and then later maybe you get some mineralization come in through structures, but there's always reasons for it to be there. And to make your deposit mining more effective and more efficient, you have to understand it. And I think that's one of the things where, sometimes you can get really fixated on a small area in the mine that you're in, but really you still need to keep the big picture in mind. And I think that's one of the places where, particularly at airborne geophysics, really helps, because you can generate that big picture and see how it all relates back to the small scale things that are happening sort of within your deposit itself.
Yeah, further to what Ellie was saying, geology has no boundary, right? So when you want to look at the subsurface, you need to understand that bigger picture, and she brings up a great point from that perspective. Going back to what Shawn was saying about the challenges within the geophysical subsurface imaging spectrum, data integration is key, right? Getting as much data, multiple data layers as possible is going to help you define what you're looking for in the subsurface. And it's very important to understand too that understanding what's happening in the subsurface would prevent or allow you to avoid certain areas that are not conducive for exploration, whether it's mining or oil and gas or any other subsurface target that you're trying to image. And so by doing these surveys ahead of any extraction or drilling or anything else is very, very important, because you define the areas that you don't want to stay away from. And so we get a knock a lot of times from environmentalists and the general public when we're doing our surveys because of the potential that it may have for the end result. But the key here is that data is very important. And by doing these surveys, we can avoid those areas and minimize the environmental impact that we're eventually going to have to experience when we actually do the final exploration. So I think it's very important to understand how much importance data has on the overall picture of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing I was thinking about just, in terms of, geophysics and environment, I mean, as Jim mentioned earlier, I mean, there's people kind of lump it into near surface geophysics as, it's just typically seen as engineering and environmental kind of work, but there's a huge amount of airborne geophysics looking for water. I think in California, they just announced a big, massive survey with a company out of Denmark who their airborne EM system has mapped water in Europe for years. In Australia, have very large programs, and so I think it's the same technology. It's just being applied for different things because again, ground materials have different levels of conductivity. So in that case, it would be clay as opposed to looking at metallic minerals. But yeah, I mean the mapping, like what Jim said about mapping kind of regional pictures to focus areas maybe where you don't want to explore is definitely interesting. But it's, I guess the way I would think about it is not places where you don't want to explore, but it also encourages new places potentially. A lot of governments, historically Canada and Australia and the US were very good at having almost full coverage of their countries or with airborne geophysics, and a lot of countries all over the world in Africa and South America are basically doing the same thing to try to encourage investment in their economies. And it's interesting because they're focusing again early stages on things like magnetics, but you could actually see in Australia now I think they're covering their whole country in electromagnetics, at a wide spacing, but for the exact reason of just moving to this, even continental scale mapping of different features just to understand the subsurface better, be it for minerals or the environment or so. Yeah, it's an interesting time for airborne geophysics, and I think things like gravity, as they're more and more accepted, will again play a part. I mean, so, and yeah, once you have those three parameters, you're pretty good at defining rock types.
And keep in mind too, Tyler, that the technology is changing. It's constantly changing, and it's affording us a better look in the subsurface. The analogy I like to use is like black and white TV from the 50s to HD TV today. That's what's happening in the subsurface imaging technology. We're just getting a much clearer picture of what's happening in the subsurface. And like FTG or full tensor gravity gradiometry, that is a high resolution gravity imaging process that really enhances the picture of the subsurface, and it gives you a much better understanding of what's happening, and certainly gives you a much better understanding of where you need to target your exploration.
Yeah, and along with the actual I guess acquisition technologies, there's huge improvements in data processing and imaging and integration and inversion, and so yeah, it's the sky's the limit. But yeah, the more information you have, the better. I think the tricky part, which maybe Ellie can talk about, is how to actually get the geology in. Sometimes the geologists and geophysicists kind of sit separate from each other and work on their problems. Having worked in a mining company, I thought it was, some companies do it well, better than others, but I think that's still a challenge. Is it's integrating a bunch of geophysical data together is challenging in itself, but it's putting the geology in there, which is the key.
It's something that we are actively sort of working on. So trying to keep that link between the geophysicists, and then sort of with the inversions and the modeling, then they come back to us and say, okay, now how does this look geologically? Does it make sense? Is what I'm seeing the same as what you're expecting to see? And then try and integrate all of that together, as well as potentially a bit of machine learning, really pushing the processing side of things to to just get the most out of the data and build the best model that we can.
Essentially, in a nutshell, the problem is that you collect data over the surface, and as Jim said, geology knows no bounds, which I really like that. There's, with most geophysical data, I'd say actually almost all, the problem is that there's so many variables underground. You have, well, if you remember linear algebra, you have, 3 equations with a million unknowns. So there could be any number of solutions. So that's why when Ellie says, you get a model, but that isn't necessarily the model. So you kind of have to check it against geology and put some constraints on it, or just say, does this kind of look like it? And sometimes that actually can change the geological interpretation. But so yeah, it's not just a turnkey kind of black box, collect your data, get a model, there's the answer. So it's an iterative process, which it's done sometimes done well. I mean, I'm guilty as a consultant. I can't deliver 1,000 models to a client. I give them one and say, we should talk about this. And hopefully they call me up to talk about it. But in a mining company where you've got a team working on a project over time, that there's a lot more scope for that. So that's great to hear that you guys are doing that at Angle.
And going back to what Ellie and Shawn just mentioned, is that bringing geology and geophysics together is exactly what we were trying to achieve with our annual meeting, right? We're trying to enhance the applied geoscience together. And quite frankly, we're probably going to take it one step further, and that is get the engineers involved as well. Now, you talk about a cultural challenge but we're being forced to understand that with the challenges that are ongoing right now in the world that we live in today, we have to reach out across the boundaries and to these other organizations and certainly these other scientific areas of focus and work together to solve these problems.
So, Ellie, what was the community response to Anglo American's project? Can you give us a little background on that? Because I know that you're in a national park, like you mentioned earlier, which I think a lot of people will find really interesting. So what was the community response?
We took sort of quite a lot of precautions because we weren't sure how people were going to react to it, to be honest. So, we sent some letters out to everyone just to sort of, let everyone know there's going to be a plane, it's going to be flying pretty low at sort of averaging 100 meters. And yeah, it's going to be sort of running lines across the area. We got some feedback from some local farms that were a little bit concerned about their horses and things. So what we did, we set up a plan with them so that if we were going to be flying above or near them on a specific day, then we'd actually give them a call just to let them know. So we did that for quite a few of those. And then on the whole, the community were absolutely amazing. Like everyone was actually just kind of excited to see the plane flying around. And, we did sort of a video that just sort of explained a little bit around the background for the geophysics and stuff, to just give people a bit of a better idea of why we were flying and what we were hoping to achieve. But yeah, everyone was really enjoyed it actually.
Jim, is there a maybe a special importance placed in this case, and you just heard Ellie's example of good education and local research before going into a community, laying that groundwork early to set yourself up for success? Is there something to be said for that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in any geophysical prospecting, whether it's airborne or land or marine, there's a permitting process that goes forward, and a lot of it is trying to make sure everybody's aware of how the operations will impact the environment, impact the as far as offshore surveys, the marine mammal impacts. There's a lot of effort that goes into the pre-planning of any geophysical survey, and keeping the lines of communication open with those that are going to be affected or impacted by the survey is very, very important. Again, I go back to the earlier comment that I made, the importance of data and the importance of imaging in the subsurface, how critical that is to minimizing the overall impact that we have. We can't not go do surveys because of what might what might be the resulting end product of an exploration process. We have to go forward with that, and data is key. As I mentioned, data is very important, and to get that data, we have to go out and do these surveys. I think Ellie brings up a great point. They must have done a wonderful job of getting at the forefront of the survey by notifying the ranchers and the landowners that here's what's going to happen. And a lot of times when you do that, they're more accepting with what's going to happen. It's when they don't get notified, they don't understand what's happening, that becomes a big issue. And I've been doing this for 40 plus years, and that's exactly the challenges that we've always had with geophysical exploration is, trying to work through some of the local municipalities and cities and towns to make them better understand what our process is going to entail. And it doesn't always work out well, I'll be honest. But as with anything else, how you handle your problems, you should be judged by that and not by the problems alone.
Shawn, any knowledge from your experiences you want to share on the topic as well?
Yeah, well, I just kind of echo what Jim said, and which I think is what Ellie and Anglo did really well. Is just people just want to know what's going on. I mean, I think a lot of times you're doing exploration, kind of closer to the middle of nowhere than a big city. So, people notice when there's, a few trucks full of guys, or people show up who haven't been there before, or all the hotel rooms are full for some reason, and what's going on here? And so, you just let people know what's going on, and, hopefully hire some local people to help you out as well. And things should go smoothly as long as you treat everyone nicely. But I guess that's a good way to go about business anyway. So.
Absolutely. Well, we started off today talking about the exploding population in the Earth right now and the need for these resources that the Earth provides. And so that being, a huge driver for our conversation as demand is rising, finding ways to have low environmental impact mines and to mine for these resources in ways that doesn't further exacerbate the climate crisis that we're already experiencing. And so I think we've had a really fascinating discussion. I want to be able to turn it over to the three of you just to give us any final thoughts or conclusions that you have, anything you want to leave our audience with today before we sign off. So Jim, let me kick it to you first, just for any final thoughts, conclusions, anything you want to leave our audience with here today.
We're excited within the SEG of the challenge to pivot towards some of these greener energy areas for sure. Keep in mind, oil and gas is not going away. It's not going away. And we're going to rely on it for quite some time. The key here is how do we minimize the impact? How do we get to a net zero carbon footprint as we go forward? And that's one of the things that we're pivoting to is we're trying to figure out ways from a carbon solutions perspective to see how we can take the applied geophysics and utilize that information or that data to enhance the efforts to a low carbon footprint, if you will. And I think that's one of the things we're going to continue to try to strive for. All the geophysical methods are important tools in the toolbox for subsurface imaging. We've talked about the importance of Airborne because of the relative ease of acquiring this information and the expanse of the area that you can image in the subsurface. And it's as Shawn pointed out, it's usually the first lob, if you will, that we go into in an exploration process is airborne geophysics. But I just want to kind of convey the comment that we are going to, from a society perspective, at least from the Society of Exploration Geophysics, we're going to continue to provide a platform for those geoscientists to meet the demands and to again enhance their efforts to solve some of these challenges that we have in the environment, and certainly with the challenges that we have with energy as we go forward. So,
Ellie, any final thoughts? Any reaction to what you heard from Jim, and any final thoughts from yourself, just on our topic and on our conversation today?
I suppose my personal final thoughts would be that there's this really, really poor perception that surrounds the mining industry as a whole, and the mining industry, it's not a bad thing. Everything comes from the ground, basically. If it wasn't grown, it was mined. And I think it's something that people tend to forget, the importance, and particularly as we're moving towards the low carbon, greener future, the amount of mining that we're going to require to get there is really, really large. So, people just need to consider that. And, while they often maybe don't want things nearby to them, at the same time, if things aren't nearby where you can keep a close eye on them and you can make sure things are done correctly and sort of, to British standards in our local area, I can say, they'll be done elsewhere. And then you've got the added sort of emissions for transporting and things like that. So, I think it's just for people to think a little bit more about where everything comes from, and maybe try not to waste things, I guess.
Shawn, final word?
I think both what Jim and Ellie said, I'd echo. I mean, I was thinking a bit about that. I mean, we haven't even touched on the kind of concept that seems to be going around a lot of critical minerals, which I guess is what Ellie's talking about. So the minerals that are going to be key to the future of, the way we want to live in a lower impact or, more environmentally friendly. So, how do you find those things? And it's going to be tough to encourage people to, explore in their backyards because, there are some countries are open to mining, but a lot for a long time have preferred to ship it elsewhere. And I think education is going to be key to that. And, hopefully maybe by understanding that, you can fly these surveys, you can use geophysics to look for water, but you can also use it to look for other stuff that's important to living in the future, like copper and wires and things for your electric car. And education, but education's always tough, but that's where things like the SEG come in to have outreach. And so I think things are looking up, hopefully. Can't get any worse.
If I could echo Shawn's comments about the SEG and how we're trying to deliver the right message. One of the things that we're doing at this year's annual meeting, the joint annual meeting that we're hosting with the APG, is we're going to have plenary sessions, panel sessions. We'll have speakers come in and give discussions and actually sit side by side and talk through some of these issues and challenges that we have. And we actually have a mining plenary session planned for this year's annual meeting that's going to be specific to that and the application of geophysics to the mining industry. And we're happy to say that actually we're going to have the president and CEO of Bell Geospace sit on one of these sessions to talk through some of the challenges from a services perspective. And I think that's how we get the message out, right? We continually talk about all these things and work through these challenges together to try to figure out the best solution as we go forward.
Fantastic stuff. Jim White, Shawn Walker, and Ellie Shaw, thank you so much for joining us here for this panel on Propensity to Talk Density, a podcast from the experts at Bell Geospace. Thank you so much once again for joining us here for the show.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And everyone, thank you for tuning into this live roundtable event brought to you by Bell Geospace. I've been your host today, Tyler Kern. Stay tuned for more from Bell Geospace, more videos, podcast content along these lines. But for this episode today, for my fantastic panel, I've been your host today, Tyler Kern. Thanks for joining us.